Thank you for joining us. Many of you have just watched the hit movie Dark Waters, so I'm sure you have many questions about the impacts of PFAS on your health and what you can do to protect yourself, your friends, and your family from the toxic forever chemicals that are so frequently in the news these days. We have a great group of experts with us, including Congressman Dan Kildee of Michigan, co-chair of the Congressional PFAS Task Force, PFAS attorney and author Rob Ballant, who of course is played by Mark Ruffalo in the movie Dark Waters, Notre Dame professor Graham Peasley, Michigan State Fire Marshal Kevin Selmeyer, and PPE expert Jeff Knabe. After we hear from our experts, we want to hear from you. So please ask your questions in the comment section and we will bring your voice to this important conversation. And with that, I'll turn it over to Congressman Dan Kildee, who's been leading efforts to address PFAS pollution on Capitol Hill.
Well, first of all, thank you, Scott, and thanks to the Environmental Working Group for this, but also for everything that you do. Obviously, being a source of expertise is really helpful to those of us who are policymakers trying to navigate this really difficult and often very technical set of issues. I first became aware of PFAS the way most legislators become aware of any issue. It came to me from the people in my home district. I represent a lot of small communities along the Lake Huron shoreline, including Oscoda, Michigan, which is the home to the former Wurtsmith Air Force Base. And that is a community that has been impacted by PFAS contamination as a result of the consistent use of firefighting foam in training and in a particular case of fire at the former Wurtsmith Air Force Base. It has affected their groundwater, it has affected the lake water, it has affected their lives in so many ways. And of course, we know, thankfully, through the great work that occurred in Parkersburg, exactly how dangerous this family of chemicals can be. So it was that impetus that brought me to this issue, fighting and standing up for the people of Oscoda, Michigan. And as I began to work on the issue, I began to hear more and more about the story of Parkersburg and what that community has gone through. And sadly, the sacrifice which led to a great contribution in many ways to the knowledge that we have about the dangers of PFAS. It became increasingly clear, and this is why this movie is so important. It became increasingly clear that we have a job to do to educate people on the dangers of environmental contamination generally, but specifically around PFAS. And that's why Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick and I launched the bipartisan PFAS task force to educate ourselves first, our fellow members of Congress, on the dangers of PFAS and to formulate policy to address the problem. And that has led to some success, but by no means are we anywhere close to where we need to be. But we have specifically addressed the issue around the dangers to firefighters, whether it's in turnout gear, obviously in AFFF, the firefighting foam that has led to so much contamination. We have made some progress in the Defense Authorization Act and other pieces of legislation in finding solutions to this problem. But the more we learn, the more we need to do. And that's why Dark Waters is so important, because it tells in a story form the real life implication of the dangers of this really toxic family of chemicals. The data is important. It's really important that we understand the science and that we base our policy on science. But we never get to the point of making those decisions, of making those hard choices, unless we understand the implication, unless we understand the story. That's why I was so happy that the work that Rob and others have done has now been depicted in this really compelling film that tells the story of a handful of families and a whole community that will suffer pain for the rest of their lives and beyond because of the callous decisions being made by people in industry that put profit ahead of the life and health of the people who helped them generate that profit in the first place. It's through this story and through the film that I came to know the work of Rob Bilott, who took this on, represented these people when they needed somebody to stand up for them, and has done really great work, both in terms of the people in Parkersburg, but also in highlighting the importance of continuing to work on this issue. So with that, let me turn it over to one of the heroes of this story, a guy who I know shuns that characterization, but it's true, Rob Bilott. Rob?
Thank you so much, Congressman. Thank you, Scott. You both have done just an incredible job in helping increase awareness and understanding of this massive PFAS problem. And thank you to everyone who's tuning in and watching this discussion, because this is the important part. All of us getting together and talking about these issues. We're dealing with now massive chemical contamination by this man-made family of chemicals, hundreds, if not thousands of them out there that are now contaminating our entire planet, in drinking water, in soil, in air, in blood, all over the world. And it's happened over the last 70 years, kind of right under our noses. And unfortunately, that's because a lot of this information was withheld and frankly covered up for so many years. And those of you who had the opportunity to see the film Dark Waters saw, what it took for a community, beginning with one family, the Tennant family, and then that's their surrounding community, to get together, to stand up, speak out, and take action to demand answers to what is this stuff in our water? What's it going to do to us over the long term? What's it going to do to our neighbors? And really the incredible sacrifice that community made, so that all of us now finally understand the chemicals that we're being exposed to in this man-made family. And that story focused on one of them, PFOA, and it really focused on exposure primarily through one route, through the drinking water. And a lot of what you've been reading about as far as PFAS and related chemicals over the last year or two, a lot of that's focused on drinking water exposures. But we now know that we're exposed to hundreds, if not thousands, of these similar related chemicals, things like PFOS that were used in things like firefighting foams, AFFF, aqueous film forming foam, which is sort of a mouth twister. But variety of different products all over the country, all over the world, stain resistant and waterproof clothing and carpeting and fast food wrappers and packaging. And because of that, these exposures are everywhere. It's not just in one area of the United States along the Ohio River. It's now turning up in drinking water all over the United States, all over the planet. And you see in the film what it took to get the information out about, frankly, what was already known about one of these chemicals, 20-year process to get that out, to get the information out, to have all the health studies done. And then what we see is the companies start tweaking these chemicals and making them slightly different, knocking a couple carbons off and calling them new. And then suddenly these new chemicals are popping up in places like North Carolina in the drinking water, things like Gen X, these replacement chemicals. And what we're hearing is we just don't know enough yet. Everything that was done on one of these. All that research, all the study was done on one, PFOA. And we now need to take another 20 or 30 years and do all of that all over again for each of these new ones that we're discovering. And I think most folks in the scientific community, and you'll hear from one of the leaders here, Dr. Peasley, and in the regulatory world, are realizing that doesn't work. Meanwhile, we have people that are exposed for decades to this, that we need to come up with a different way. And one of the things that these chemicals were used for, I mentioned the waterproof clothing. Firefighters not only have been exposed to these materials through firefighting foam, but through the coatings of their gear historically. And we're just now starting to try to get the research and the studies done to tell us how much were people potentially exposed to and what could that do to you. And so I'm really privileged to be able to be on the call here with folks like Dr. Peasley, who I'm going to turn it over to, who can tell you about just some of the emerging research that we're just now starting to be able to do to help hopefully firefighters, emergency responders start to understand the full scope of their exposures. It goes beyond just the drinking water. So I'm happy to turn it over to Dr. Peasley. And again, thanks to everyone for participating tonight.
Thank you, Rob. That's very kind. I'm honored, and thank you, Scott, for inviting me. This is an honor to be on the panel with such distinguished guests. My role as a scientist is to try and keep us science-based, but I think the movie has shown and has certainly a good portrayal of the science. There's nothing inaccurate in there, which is scary because that brings it home as to how close it's going to hit all of us. And to try and relate it to firefighters. And the remaining two speakers are both going to speak to that much more eloquently than I. But I'd like to sort of bridge that distance and say, well, I've heard this, I watched this movie, or I've heard about this, I've heard about Representative Kildee's actions. I mean, what does that mean for me? And as a firefighter, there's several routes of exposure. And as a scientist, I'm very interested in figuring those out, but also, you know, are there ones we've forgotten? And AFFF, the Class B foams, has been mentioned several times. They're the ones that these are forever chemicals. So once that's used, it gets in the groundwater, it stays there forever, folks, and it will get into you. Secondly, there's this new paper we just put out on turnout gear and the fact that those are made with fluorochemicals that are to keep you dry. And it's important that turnout gear be dry, but it is, of course, it is not critical that PFAS be used to keep it dry. And so the idea is that we would get a substitute and try to make the gear safer for the firefighter if it doesn't have PFAS in it. What I'm hoping to make from all of this is that there are multiple exposure routes, and try not to underplay or overplay any of them, but what if our firefighters are also getting exposed from their drinking water? And there are wonderful stories out there about strange connections of foam getting used. The firefighters that serve our communities also drink the water in their communities. And any use of firefighting foam historical could have gotten into the drinking water of a community. And that's the real white elephant in the room. You don't want to be responsible for poisoning a community, let alone doing it yourself. And so there's routes which everybody can be exposed, and firefighters are on the leading edge of all of these things because they use their firefighting foams both for the purposes of occupationally, but they also use turnout gear. We don't know whether turnout gear is as dangerous as AFFF. We certainly know that there's exposed more, but there's probably less dangerous material on there. We know AFFF is a immediate concern, but is a little bit every day as dangerous as a lot all at once? We don't know. And so there's a lot more studies to be done, and I'm going to now try and relate some of this to the fire services, but to do that even better, we're going to pass it along to Kevin, who is the fire marshal for the state of Michigan, sort of ground central for PFAS these days. We have a lot of attention focused on Michigan, who discovered it and coming from all sorts of sources, and they've done a pretty good job of leading the way for other states to follow. So I'll leave it off to Kevin.
Thanks, Graham. Thanks everybody for the opportunity to be here tonight. And Congressman Kildee, you bring up Wordsmith Air Force Base, and myself being an Air Force veteran, crash fire rescue. My father did work 34 years as a federal firefighter, so our family has definitely been exposed to AFFF. Some of the things that we're trying to do here in Michigan, working with a group that we call MPART, which is a group of many state agencies working together to try to solve this issue here in Michigan. And the congressman is right. The more we find out more and more every day. One of the initiatives that we're trying to do here in Michigan is the 8 chain, and Robbie did a great job in the movie of, what is this? And it kept coming up, 8 chain. What's this 8 chain? And a lot of the firefighting foam that is around in the state of Michigan was 8 chain. So we just finished a program on September 30th where we collected over 52,000 gallons of foam that we took out of the inventory of Michigan fire departments. And yes, there's still a need. We'll still have fires with hydrocarbons. We're interested in what comes next, if you want to say. But what we did is we took a lot of this foam out of the inventory so that it can't be used and it doesn't have an effect on the environment. Another thing that's happened is, the House and the Senate here in Michigan actually passed a bill, some modifications to some public acts. Firefighters can't train with AFFF in the state of Michigan any longer, which is good things that needed to happen. So as we move forward, so kind of the collection of the foam, limiting training with it. We also have a pollution action phone line that people can call. Anytime a fire department does use Class B AFFF foam, they're calling into that number so we can get people out there right away. So we can, clean up as much as we can, as quickly as we can. So definitely a lot of effort going on here in the state. The congressman hit it straight up, though. A lot more work needed across the country as we address this. And it's an honor to be here tonight. And I think it's important. We're kind of into the firefighting theme side of it. Jeff Nobby is definitely well-versed in the turnout gear that we've been wearing. Myself, I've been in the fire business for 36 years. So interested to hear what you have to say about turnout gear.
Thank you, Kevin. Yes, I've been a volunteer firefighter in Northern California for 20 years. I retired out of that in 2019. But for the past 10 years, I've been in the PPE care and maintenance business of washing, repairing, inspecting, and testing all of the firefighter turnouts in Northern California and for some DoD organizations that we had contracts with. But I want to kind of set the tone of what gear actually has a fluorinated finish, so we get an understanding on what we're dealing with. If you have a structural set of firefighting gear that's NFPA 1971 certified, it's going to have a fluorinated finish on it. No questions, full stop. It's on there. Now the question is when did they start or stop using the finish that contained the PFOA, the C8 that the other gentleman was talking about? And that transition was dependent upon the manufacturer between 2014 and 2015. So just so we're clear, if you have gear that was manufactured 2014 or before, there is no question that that has a component that has been proven in court by Rob that does cause cancer and other ailments. I think there was linked to 2 cancers and a couple other ailments. That gear will still be in service if you follow NFPA 1851 until 2024 or 2025. There's a crossover between 2014 or 15. There's new stuff, safer as people call it, with the C6 finish, the Gen X. There's been no studies to prove that that's actually safe because it hasn't been proven in court. So what do you need to do to help mitigate those long-term occupational exposures? If you don't really need to wear your structural turnouts on all your calls, then you need to do that cost-benefit analysis. Should I wear this on a medical call? Yes or no? If you don't, then keep it in the apparatus and just wear whatever your standard uniform is, or if you have an EMS type uniform. But if you cannot wear your gear, the suggestion is you don't. Now, some people say that we're telling you not to wear your safety gear at all. That's not what I or the committee is telling you. If you need it, absolutely wear it. Just do that exposure cost-benefit analysis for long-term exposure. If you do need to handle your gear, if at all possible, handle your gear with some type of medical gloves to prevent any dermal absorption of the fluorinated finish, or a term that I learned not too long ago is inadvertent ingestion, to having fluorinated products on your hands and then touching some food and then eating it. You're now ingesting it. The other part is, over time, that finish degrades either through high heat or chemical exposure or UV exposure. That finish starts to fall off. Then it gets attached to the dust. So what you want to do is periodically clean out your apparatus in your PPE storage rooms. Now, most people are just going to take everything out. They're going to use a little air hose and blow it all out, and you're going to throw all those particulates in the air, and then you're going to have an inadvertent inhalation. So you don't want to do that. You don't want to get the leaf blower, the backpack blower, and blow out the PPE storage room. Hose it down or wipe down the inside of the apparatus with a damp rag. So you can, just like with asbestos, you don't want that stuff to get airborne. Encapsulate it in a wet, damp rag, or hose it down and squeegee out your PPE room. If you do have to transport, which a lot of people keep their stuff with them, especially volunteers, or if you work overtime at other stations, do your best to transport the stuff in a sealed container and or a zipped up gear bag. to prevent any cross-contamination or shedding of that PFAS into your vehicle, which I'm sure you use it with your family also, then you throw all your baby stuff in the back. So those are some things that you can do to help prevent any cross-contamination of this fluorinated finish as it comes off, either on your hands or into the dust. So with that, I'll shoot it back to Scott.
Great. Thanks to Jeff and to all of our speakers. Now we want to hear from you. And for those of you who are just joining us, you're watching a Facebook Live event. One of the questions we've gotten for you, Rob, is just why did it take so long for people to know that PFOA and this class of chemicals were dangerous?
That's a great question. It's not a very great answer, unfortunately. What we found out kind of the hard way was information was frankly just withheld and kept secret from the public for many, many years. Tests were being done by the companies that were making this stuff and the primary users of it that date back into the early 1960s. And unfortunately, a lot of that information simply wasn't turned over to the government or revealed to the public. And it took the community members coming forward and having to go to court and dig through those documents to actually find any of that. And as a lawyer, I'll be the first one to tell you, people shouldn't have to do that. They shouldn't have to go get lawyers and dig through these documents to find information like this about public health threats. And even now that we know about the information being withheld by about PFOA, it's very difficult to find information about where these chemicals, not only PFOA, but the related PFAS chemicals, what products were they used in, who used them, for how long, what products contain it, who switched away from it. It's a lot of that's still being withheld as confidential business information, believe it or not. So it's incredibly difficult. So events like this, where at least we discuss it and people are knowing to at least beginning to ask the questions are incredibly important.
And a kind of a related question for you, Rob, is what do we know about how long the companies that made AFFF or Turnout Gear, how long have they known that PFOA might cause health problems? And are people demanding that information?
That is the subject of massive litigation that's going on all across the country right now. As the military, for example, started sampling for this stuff outside military bases, like in Michigan or in other places across the country, it was found, unfortunately, in drinking water all over the country. That's triggered a massive wave of litigation by local municipalities and water providers who are facing millions of dollars in costs to now try to clean this stuff up, or states that are faced with sampling costs, analysis costs, health department costs. So we're now seeing lawsuits that have been filed all over the country, and a lot of those are now being pushed into one big multi-district litigation in South Carolina called the AFFF multi-district litigation, where there are thousands of cases pending. And that's one of the key issues. Who knew what when? Who actually knew this? And did the manufacturers like the 3Ms and DuPonts withhold that from people as well? Who knew? And how far back does that knowledge go?
And another question we're getting, and maybe this is a question that Graham or Kevin or Jeff can answer, what sort of medical monitoring is being done specifically for the fire service?
I can do that. I can probably answer that as well as I can do if these two fire service folks know better. Basically none. It's a very difficult test to do. It's a blood test, and it requires there are 4 labs in North America that'll do it that I know of. And so that means it's an $800 test and often a 5 or 6 week return on results. And it just measures the PFAS. It doesn't tell you anything about health effects because we don't know what they are. We just say that they're there. And there are some published studies that Rob's referred to that says C8 is bad. With the others are probably bad or not worse, but we don't know that. And for an average firefighter to find out what's going on in the fire services, it's near impossible. You have to have somebody to take the blood, which in the fire services is not so hard. There are phlebotomists everywhere. But then you needed a MD to write a script to get it analyzed, and then you need a laboratory to do the work, and then you need somebody to pay for it, and no insurance company is paying for an extra test at this point. So it's very difficult to get them done. And that's where I think Rob is working hard to try and get somebody to take ownership of this problem and say, look, we should be paying for testing. We should be doing studies on people. There are some academic studies going on. There are some small studies that have been done by NIOSH, but they don't have a very big budget. So we're trying hard to get them a bigger budget, that this should be done occupationally on fire services. And the studies have been good, but they've been small. And 1,000 here and 1,000 there isn't going to tell you what you need to know on the tens of thousands of people, and of course the million firefighters we have.
Yeah, if I could add to that also, I talked to a gentleman who was in the Air Force, and he was able to get the VA to do a PFAS screening. But as talking to him, from my understanding, they only tested him for PFOA. Well, and I think Rob can clarify this. I believe that might have been the wrong test, because he was trying to get his level of foam exposure, which is not PFOA, it's PFOS. So they only did the one analyte. A standard analyte panel for $800 is the 9 analyte panel. So it's going to be PFAS, PFOA, and a couple of the C6s. Those are the common criminals within the PFAS family of turnouts and foams. So that's one of the key things. You need to make sure that you're asking for the right tests for what you believe you were exposed to.
I'll jump in real quick. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Congressman.
I was just going to say, I think there is a need for more research. Obviously, there is a study that we've been able to get funded that's a $30 million study through the Department of Defense and others to study the exposure on veterans, which would include military firefighters. It's a longitudinal study that will require time and some deeper analysis. And I clearly think that more study is necessary, but I also think we ought to start with the presumption that this stuff is not chocolate cake and candy, that it's dangerous. And much of the time, what we find from industry is that they want us to prove beyond any doubt that the chemicals they're producing, even though they're part of the same family of chemicals that were part of the Parkersburg study, the C8 study, we ought to assume that these are dangerous and make sure that we apply science to ensure that they're not, rather than the other way around.
You know, and that's a great segue. And I'm sorry, Scott. I'll just so people know, you know, one of the data gaps I'm trying to address is in direct response to this argument that there isn't enough known yet about the other PFAS, or, you know, frankly, there isn't enough funding out there to do massive studies that are big enough to get the tens of thousands of people you need to confirm cancers and things. So I've actually brought a new case where we're seeking to bring one on behalf of everyone in the country who has these chemicals in their blood. Our lead plaintiff is an Ohio firefighter. And the goal is to have independent studies done that are big enough to actually tell us what this mix of PFAS is doing to us, but to have the companies responsible, those who made the PFAS, pay for them, so that we're not all stuck holding the bill. So that's something that's going on right now that we're trying through the court system.
And I was just going to ask, what else should Congress be doing? Congressman Kildee, I know you have a bill to try to do more to protect firefighters. What else should Congress be doing?
Yeah, I mean, we do have some specific legislation to protect firefighters that I've introduced with Representative Slotkin, Representative McGovern. You know, one interesting thing is that I got an amendment in the Federal Aviation Administration reauthorization that finally allowed airports to use something other than PFAS containing AFFF. But we need to do a few things. One is to push the development of alternatives. Research will help with that. I mean, the big, broad actions that we need to take is to put PFAS under CERCLA, to make sure that we can force cleanup where it already exists, where we know that it is. But we have a whole series, and it's the Pfos Action Act. I suggest people take a look at it, a compilation of a number of steps that would not only deal with the cleanup needs, actually fund a lot of the cleanup needs, force industry to pay for its responsibilities through the use of CERCLA, but also to prevent more from going into the environment, and start with the assumption that these chemicals are dangerous, and ensure that we're not introducing more of these really, you know, sort of minor alternatives to an already dangerous substance because it has a different formulation, without any regulation whatsoever. Clearly, we need a drinking water standard. We need a Clean Water Act standard. We need to take this on a lot of different fronts. And a lot of it can't be done just through the legislative route. And that's why the work that Rob is doing is so important. We need better law that he can then point to as a tool in the litigation that he's pursuing.
One other question we got for Graham is why led you to even test Turnout Gear for PFAS in the first place?
Well, that's pretty simple. I was contacted by a spouse of a firefighter, and she was angry because she knew it was there and she believed it was there, and she wanted somebody to confirm it. And I'm interested in looking at all sorts of sources of PFAS. And I think it's important to realize that there's more than just the ones we've talked about. There's lots of other sources of PFAS. And it should be regulated at a level. But if we can do it with market forces, I'm happy to do it that way too. And if we can just prove, is it really essential that it be there? And in both these cases, AFFF was, oh, it's got to be essential. Got to have it. Nothing else can put out a gasoline fire. Well, turns out that's not true. It can be done with other substitutes, and same thing with the gear. We can make dry gear without PFAS. And so I think that's where everybody's action is to, from the trenches on up, we all have to start and say, ask the question why. And these guys have done an excellent job doing it in Congress and doing it in the law courts. It's up to us now to keep up the unions, to keep up the fire services, keep up the administration to say, look, we need this to be PFAS free as best we can, and make sure that we get not a regrettable substitution to a different PFAS.
One last question for Kevin. Kevin, we've gotten a couple questions about whether you or your family have had your own blood tested for PFAS, or do you plan to, and just kind of how are people confronting these risks who have handled fluorinated foams, who have maybe fluorinated gear, maybe drinking water that's got high levels of PFAS. Can you share a little bit about that?
Scott, that's a great question. No, I have not been tested. One of the things is more is coming to light, right? Of, as I look at that, would I like to be tested? Absolutely. I mean, tie back to my, being, 20 years old and joining the Air Force and then working, still in the fire service. I will say this, we did get it's a small study. We're going to be able to study about 70 fire departments here in the state of Michigan. It's being coordinated through our Department of Public Health. And what we're going to, it's a 5-year study. We're in the first year really gathering who's going to be part of the study. So there's little pockets that pop up, but most definitely, I commend, those who are working hard to get our veterans tested. They most certainly, that if you tie it all back, that's where the AFFF starts, right? It's the military, and then it comes into if you want to say the public side of the fire service. So definitely a great place to start.
Well, I want to thank all of our experts and all of the folks at home who are watching us. If you want more information, feel free to visit ewg.org. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.